Today we're actually going to be showing you putting up a temporary fence basically on this back side of our property. If you know, we call it the sheep field, but it's growing too good of grass just for the sheep because the sheep cannot catch up. So we're going to be building a polywire fence. Basically, we're a Gallagher affiliate, so you'll see a Gallagher link to all the things that we have here, such as the polywire and things like that. But we're going to run this fence, we're going to show you what we're using, and pretty much you can keep animals in with this fencing right now. Everything is expensive. So when we talk about barbed wire, we just redid some sections of barbed wire in perimeter fencing. The material was astronomical. It was about 2 times what it was just last year. This is an easy, surefire way to make paddocks, and it's so easy and so economical to do this way. Now, we do have permanent fencing going around our property. The only reason we did that is just so we could keep certain people, certain things out, not really cows in. We use simple fencing all the way throughout our property, not only for our cattle, but for our sheep, for our pigs. All of them are using some kind of net wire or temporary fencing wire. We're going to be using just basically a poly wire today. That's actually what we're doing to keep in the cattle. That's all you need. It's 1 or 2 strand. We use 2 strand. A lot of people use 1. Ours tend to do better with 2, especially when it comes to bulls and yearlings. So we're going to be running 2 strands today. We're going to be using 2 Gallagher gate hooks and handles basically to be able to open and close the poly wire easily. Gallagher turbo wire, we really like it. Just to use the poly tape and still have a bunch of poly tape areas, but the wire seems to do really well, and that's why we tend to run 2 strands, because it tends to be seen better when you're not using poly tape to run 2 strands for the cattle. We also have some ceramic post hooks basically where we can go into the wood post, and that way that holds stability as we kind of run this fence. Fiberglass temporary fencing stakes, they're the 4 foot. You can buy these anywhere. We tend to get ours either at a co-op, or you can buy them from Gallagher. You can get them at Tractor Supply. I mean, you really can get them anywhere. They do phenomenally well. There's nothing wrong with using the pigtails, but the pigtails are usually for single strand. Being that we're using double strand, we need something that's got another hook on it. We like the fiberglass better than the straight plastic. They're about the same price, but the plastic, to me, after it's been in the weather a lot and we leave our fencing up, even though they're temporary, we still leave a lot of our rods in the ground. They tend to break and get brittle after a while compared to the fiberglass. Now, these will tear up too. You're not keeping these for years and years and years and years, but the ones we've had for 5 to 7 years since we've been on this property, we've probably gotten rid of 5 or 10. The plastic ones, after 2 or 3 years, I just feel like they get a little bit more brittle, especially if they're in the sun a lot. Before we run fence, we actually have to put the actual temporary fencing pieces up. It literally will take about 5 minutes to actually get these in the ground. It's so easy, and it makes it where I'm literally moving cows here, and I made this decision this morning and said, okay, we need to get cows on this fresh, beautiful Bahia grass that's growing, because our sheep are still, if you remember, by our soybeans and corn, and they're cleaning that area up instead of mowing it. So they're utilizing that grass, so this grass needs to be utilized too. This will help those new fields rest and get some height on them to where they'll reseed themselves to where that pasture will start looking better. Then 10-15 minutes, you can have a whole field ran that quick. So I want to talk about this rod just for a second. We put these rods about 30 foot apart, about 10 yards or so apart, not exact measurement, just going off my feet. A few things. If you're teaching an animal about this fence, I would get it tighter. I'd maybe go, instead of going 10 yards, maybe 5 yards a piece. Tighten it up, make sure your line is tight, but also don't give them any kind of dip, extra space to test it. You want to make it look like it is a true hard fence that hurts them. Now, say you're putting it up only for a day. Say you're rotating almost like a Greg Judy style, very regenerative mob graze. You've got 40 head coming in on an acre, and you're going to be moving them just for the day. I would not put them this close, 10 yards apart. I would put them close, probably 30 or 40 yards apart. All you want to do at that point is have a hanging temporary fence on these, and then that way it gives you, it's less work that you have to do, because there's no point in putting all this rods up for half a day or a whole day. We put it up because they're going to be here in about 2 or 3 days. We want it a little bit stronger, plus we have calves like we talked about. If I have calves, I want to put 2 strands, 1 low. If I have just cows, 1 strand will be sufficient. If you have a bull will test this, not because a bull wants to test it. Typically, if you have, say you have a cow in heat, or you have a heifer in heat that he can smell, or there's another bull over there that he's trying to, you know, to show his dominance to, he may test this fence too. So we tend to make it a little bit tighter, a little bit stronger if we've got calves or bulls in here. However, our calves are pretty used to this, and also they're with their mamas, so I'm not worried about it. We're gonna put them 30 foot apart, 10 yards apart, and then that way it makes it easy for me to set up. But back to this, on these, that is a foot positioner to where you can drive it in the ground with your foot on these rods. Now these are fiberglass, but the little pedal here and the foot spot is just plastic. I've broken many of them going into hard ground. If you're in gravel or you're in a harder ground, I would say get you a little mallet, you know, just a simple rubber mallet. That'll help drive these a little bit better, because if you're fully relying on that, it's not gonna get you in hard ground and you're gonna break them. Then you're gonna get mad that you spent $4 or $5 on this thing and all of a sudden it broke and you didn't even get to try it. So no waste policy. This is all the extra lettuce that we're not taking to seed. We gave potatoes to the chickens yesterday, so the pigs get the lettuce. And then Aiden's also got our scrap bucket, so we have no food waste at all. If we don't eat it and we grow it and then we still can't eat it, it's either going to chickens or pigs. We literally have a zero food waste here. And guess what? If it's pork or bones where we don't want our pigs to eat it, we give it to our dog. So it's truly, we have no food waste here at the Max. So before we actually run our fence, we have to put our ceramic fence holders on. The reason we buy these go into the wood post. When you're running temporary fencing, especially if you're making curves and corners, the little fiberglass rods will not keep it tight. So what we'll do is either put a T-post up if we have to make a corner, but if we have these wood posts are in the ground, we're going to use them, and that helps keep everything tight. As we pull it tighter, it keeps everything snug, tight, and where if a cow does want to test it with their nose, because that's typically what they're going to do is touch it with their nose to it, it's going to keep it tight enough to where when they put it on there, it's going to sense, and within 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to pop them hard. Another thing to be conscious about when it comes to temporary fencing is you need to make sure that if you can run a continuous strand or as less connectors as you have to put in there where you're binding and crimping and tying, I don't care what anybody says, that does hurt your charge a little bit. So if you can keep one continuous run going, that makes it better. So how do we do that when it comes to running, you know, 2 or 3 pieces of fence? So we're going from basically where the driveway comes in. We're going to circle this post and make our way all the way behind here. So at the ending point where your fence needs to end, not start, not where your gates are going to be. So where you're actually putting them together and running them through and making 2 fences instead of 1. So you need to go to that side. So not the gate that you start. So most people would say, let's start this right at the very front with one of the gates holding it on there. You can't do that, because guess what? You got to go through ceramic fence holders and there's no way to put it in there. So for instance, I'm gonna show you what I mean. So with these, you have clips. You can open it up and it can slide right through there, just like that. But with ceramic, there's no way to get into there like that. So what we have to do is we will start going through the bottom first. So we will run this in through the bottom back to the top. Now we're gonna run the top first. So the top will be pulling and it will be going all the way back down to where this will be the fence connector. This will be where we tie our gate to. But if we tied it off now, we're not running through here. And if we started way down there, then basically we could not keep it one continuous run, because this could not fit through there. So just a hint, think about your fencing actually before you start running. I know that sounds stupid, and I know you say, hey, you can crimp it, you can tie it, and I have, but it does do better. It carries more joules, it has more punching power for these animals, especially if you're training them to run one continuous piece, if at all possible. Or if you have to mend it, maybe one mend versus having to mend it so many times just by not thinking the plan out. So what I'm saying is think the plan out. Leave the spool right here and actually have everything. Now, this is what we typically do. Again, on a big run, it's very important to have something there. If you don't have an actual spool holder, what we'll do is we'll put a grounding rod right in the ground and then put the spool on it, so that way it won't tangle up, especially when you talk about poly tape. Poly wire is not as bad. So I'll just lay it on the ground. Plus it's not a long run. Run it through the bottom first, then to the top, and then we're going to pull this all the way through. Starting it not tight right now. You're not going to get it tight until you secure the bottom too. We're going to just pull it. Remember, this top strand is 42 inches, and then from the 42 inch one we'll drop down 2 more, and you're going to put it around 16 to 18 inches, just depending on how far you got the rod in the ground. Pull this through. Once you get to the end, you're going to tie it off. There's your tightness there. And then when you start walking back and putting the second in, you're actually going to hold the roll, walking it all the way, keeping it tight. We got to the last fiberglass post, so then once we came through it, we went on and put the gate hanger on there. I always leave extra poly wire. I know people say, oh, well then it could touch you and electrocute you. Well, I mean, if you're smart and you're watching it, it won't get you. But I always leave this because you never know when you may need a little extra slack on any piece. You see, it's tight, but not as tight as I want it. But the first strand is not running off tightness. The tightness is going to come when you run the second strand. Now, we're running 2 strands, so the first one's 42 inches. If we were running just 1 strand, I may not go that high, especially because your calves can walk under it with no issue. So I'd probably drop it to like a 36 inch, probably. I don't run a lot of single strand because it's just as easy to run 2 strands, and those 2 strands give you a little bit more security when it comes to difficult animals. I've had somebody message me, and you remember Petey, we just got processed, is in freezer camp now, but when people call, they'll say, well, that ain't gonna keep my cow in. Well, if you got a cow that's crazy enough to jump through barbed wire, jump over fence, or to break through wire or bust wire, or go through poly tape, or go through poly net, which PD did. And I had another cow at one time in the old videos of the Max Sizzle. That might just be telling you don't need that animal on the farm anyway, because they shouldn't be that difficult. Make sure you have smarter animals than docile animals. Now, if you're dealing with more difficult animals, I would probably make sure they're in perimeter fencing. Try them out, so you can make a real tight paddock in perimeter fencing, like 10 to 15, like a little corral for them. Put them feed, put them water, so that way they don't have to get out for any reason. Let them test it first before you start putting them in big paddocks where they chance getting out, because livestock's an investment. The last thing you want to do is lose your investment. You know, this is not fail-safe. I've caught animals that's gotten out of full fencing. I've caught animals that's gotten out of 1 strand, and I've got animals that will literally graze, like my dairy cow will graze out here with no fencing because she don't know any better. So when we talk about this, nothing's surefire. Nothing is. But this is the easiest way to make sure you're taking care of your animal, but doing it in the most efficient way of rotational grazing. You're not having to put a lot of cross fencing, barbed wire in, which if you have the money and the means to put a ton of barbed wire in, of course. I mean, it's great. It'll hold a cow a whole lot better than temporary fencing. But that's just it. This is called temporary fencing. The whole purpose is to be able to move it when you need to. You can't move that barbed wire. I always have a lot of naysayers. Oh, I can't have no cows in that. Well, it's because you might have crazy cows. If your cows are not used to rotating and being part of this movement of true heavy mob grazing, getting the fresh grass, moving the next day, moving the next, you've got to train them. So this is how you train them, by putting them in something that may have some perimeter fencing. Keep it tight. Also, maybe put them tighter than 10 yards a piece. Put them 5 yards a piece like we talked about originally. And that way they're going to learn to do better. Second wire is on. Remember, the top needs to be tight, but your bottom more than anything needs to be tight when it comes to the fencing, because that's the one that especially your calves or younger heifers are going to try first. A calf especially is going to put their nose down like they're trying to eat below the wire, and then it'll graze their face. So cows are back on this fresh grass. We've got the grounding rod in. Now we have Gallagher, Patriot, American Farm Works, Zareba, Premier One. We have so many different chargers because we run about 10 to 15 solar chargers on average in a week. Don't try to buy the ones from the co-ops that are cheaper or Tractor Supply. No offense to American Farm Works or Zareba, they don't hold up. Their charge is good, their joules are good. They do good for a while, but they cannot hold up with weather like the Gallaghers or the Premier Ones. My favorite, even though I'm not affiliated with Premier One or anything like that, I love Gallagher fencing, but I actually like the charger of Premier One. The IntelliShock 60 is probably my favorite for all animals. We've got it hooked to the bottom, so that way we know it's going to hit harder on that one because it's got to travel a long way to get up to the top. The top is good, there's nothing wrong with it, but we don't need it really charging the top as much as we need the hot bottom, because that's where the cows are grazing, that's where their noses are, that's where the calf is gonna try and get nosy and find out what it is. If they're eating this grass, they'll be here for 2 days. The good thing is it only took me about 15 to 20 minutes to actually set the fence up. So it doesn't feel bad when you turn around and have to move it all over here to the other side, because it wasn't that much work. How you train your cows is all about making sure when you set your fence up, you've got it hot. You do not want them being around any string like this without it being on. If they ever test it and it's not on, say you just forget to turn it on, it's gonna be hard to break them from that, because a cow is plenty big enough to walk straight through that and really not feel it on their skin. You want to feel it on their nose, on their head, on their legs, where they can feel it and know it's there. So don't ever let your fence go without being a charger on it, or let it get too weak where it's not popping them. They're gonna walk through it every time. Other than that, have fun.